James Lindsay. Welcome to New Discourses Bullets, where I give a short bullet point type summary of one topic from woke Marxism that you need to understand so that we can stop this. Today is a slightly ambiguous term. It's a murky term. It's a word you've heard. It only has 3 letters. That word is all, A-L-L, all. And it has a specialized meaning in Marxism that you need to understand. Now, I start off by saying it's murky and ambiguous because it doesn't always mean the woke thing. So it's a word that when you see it, you have to wonder why it's there and if it's being applied to woke purposes. So sometimes it will be all students this, all children that, all Americans the other thing. These are kinds of contexts you'll see it. We want to create an education system where all students feel like they belong. We want to create a equity system in the government where all students or all Americans have access to financing, whatever it happens to be. Sometimes the word is legitimate. Sometimes they're just saying it rhetorically, or they genuinely mean it in the sense of a universal all, but it has a specialized meaning. The reason that they say education for all students or where all students succeed, why do they specify all is the question you have to ask. Why do they have to say we're trying to build out a model so that all students can succeed instead of just saying we're building out a model for student success or something like that? And it's because under the belief system of woke Marxism, society is contoured into what they call an unlevel playing field or an unlevel knowing field. So some people already have greater advantages than others. They have privilege. Other people do not. They're excluded from those opportunities, that access or those privileges, and they are oppressed by their exclusion. The goal of inclusion is to bring them into that, so it only applies to them. So when you read something in a woke piece of literature about education and it says, we're trying to create a system where all students can succeed and feel like they belong, you know when they say all, that they mean some. All under woke understanding means some, but not any some. It means the people that they've designated as victims of systemic power. So what it means, or what they believe, is that certain people, the people who have privilege, are already succeeding. They already belong. So you don't have to take special steps to help them belong or succeed. You don't have to take any special effort except maybe to reduce how easy it is for them to succeed or to belong in comparison to other people, because they're already succeeding. They think that they believe that the system is rigged. You must understand this. The woke belief system, being woke, means believing the system is rigged in favor of certain groups to the exclusion of other groups. Being aware of that, realizing why it's a critical problem and must be corrected, and how to do the activism to correct it. So the students who are in a position of privilege already have access, already belong, already have success guaranteed to them. So either you do nothing or you work on their unfair privilege, make them aware of it, make them suffer for it. The way you can make them suffer for it is by punishing them or restricting them from it, making them feel guilty for it. Everybody else, the designated victims, which are not necessarily racial minorities, sexual minorities, etc., it's not necessarily them because they don't count unless they're conscious. So it's only people who have adopted the cult initiation of woke Gnosticism who count. Those people, the oppressed, have to be favored. You have to do proactive handicapping of the situation. If we were playing golf or bowling, people used to bowl. We knew what a handicap was. You add points, you make it easier, you privilege them intentionally to make up for the so-called unlevel playing field. The goal is to level the playing field. So when they say we want to make a place where all students feel like they belong, what they're actually telling you is we fundamentally believe some students feel like they don't belong, so we're going to go out of our way to favor them and disfavor the people who already feel like they belong. So what all often means under woke is bias, intentional bias to level the so-called playing field, to correct for the systemic oppression they think contours everything. So what do you have? So do you understand this? Before I continue, think about it for a second. Do you understand this? All means some. when used in a woke sense. It's not all people, it's all people who are in the cult. It's not all students, it's the ones who accept the ideology. It's not all Americans, it's the Americans who are historically marginalized or systemically underserved, who have to be given special privileges so that all Americans can succeed. You remember back in the day when they said all lives will matter when Black lives matter? What that means is you have to systematically work toward whatever BLM wanted to push. You systematically have to uplift one group, and only then will all be satisfied. Does that make sense? So what do you do with this? You have to listen judiciously. You have to listen with discernment, or read other than listen. You have to pay attention. And when you see that word all, you have to pause and ask, is there a reason that word all has been included? If it's in a woke document, I can just go ahead and tell you, it's not ambiguous. When they say all, they mean some. They mean favoring their so-called oppressed groups and the people who are conscious of what it means to be oppressed within them, and disfavoring everybody else. If it's in a woke document, all means bias toward their favored people. That's what it means, because everybody else has already got theirs. Everybody else's story has already been told. We just want to hear all stories. No, you don't. You want to hear the stories of the people you believe have been systematically silenced, or as Paulo Freire puts it, lowered into a culture of silence because of their oppression. Submerged, he says, in a culture of silence. If it's in a woke document, that's what it means. If it's not in a woke document, if you hear a politician saying it, for example, Democratic or Republican, then you have to use some discernment. Do you need that adjective, all? Is it an adjective? Do you need that modifier? Do you need to have specified all? Or are you doing so in an appeal to universalism? Or is there some other agenda attached to it that's going to be biased in these usual ways to so-called level the playing field? We look at the Financial Services Committee. I did a thread on Twitter about this fairly recently. The new Financial Services Committee under the 118th Congress, the newest one. What's his name? Patrick, not McCarthy. It's the other, McHenry. Patrick McHenry is the chair, and he puts out every single subcommittee has its marching orders, and every single subcommittee has a marching order to strengthen diversity and inclusion, to strengthen access. And he gives out this blanket statement at the beginning of his press release about his subcommittees. This is Republican, by the way, all Republican committee. He puts out his marching orders, and he gives his press release, and the press release says specifically that they're going to do this to help ensure that all Americans have access. Well, why did he have to say all Americans? Is he just being... Is he just using universalist liberal rhetoric, or is he nodding to the fact that half of the crap in his subcommittees mentions underserved communities, diversity, inclusion? Does he know what he's doing? Probably not. These are the thing with this cult is it's a cult mediated through language and use of language. So I've often said that with cults, you have an inner circle who really, really knows what's going on. Then you have an inner school who understands the doctrine that's much broader, but doesn't really, really know what's going on. And then you have an outer school who has been initiated, but doesn't really, so that they've bought into the cult belief system, but they don't understand what's going on at all. And then I never really mentioned this part, but there's almost like an outer, I don't know what to call it, aura, cloud, I don't know. What there is a habit of people outside the cult to pick up the language, the rhetorical tools, and use them completely ignorant of what they're saying, completely ignorant of what they're signaling. And it's very, very difficult to discern who's in what category. So what you have to do practically, I'm not accusing the Financial Services Committee of being woke, although it does say diversity and inclusion in every single subcommittee, which is a massive problem. I am charging people such as yourselves who have these people as representatives to ask the question, what do you mean by that? When you say all Americans are going to be served by this, how are you going to serve all Americans? How will you do it? Are you going to do it through a biased program that favors certain people and hands out entitlements based on group status and perceived oppression? Or are you going to do it through actual non-discriminatory open access? Are you going to do it through non-discrimination, or are you going to do it through intentional so-called anti-racist discrimination to make up for past or present or alleged or systemic disparities? So when you see the word all and it feels out of place, you should feel immediately the need to ask the question, how do you mean that? How are you going to do it? And it's tedious, but we must ask the question every single time, because under woke, all means some, and the way that the sum works, one more time, is that the privileged already have theirs, so that if everybody or all will have theirs, you're going to take some away from them and give it to somebody else. The people who are privileged have to be diminished so that the people who aren't can have equal access. That's the words, or equitable access. That's what it's about. All is some, and it indicates redistribution to so-called level the playing field, because their religion believes that the playing field is inherently unlevel. So if you see the word all in a woke context, it means some. If you see the word all in a context where it seems a little strange, you need to ask how that's going to be served. How are you going to serve all Americans? Through non-discrimination or through deliberate discrimination to redistribute? The question has to be asked every time.